Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Book Festival for our panel, Escaping the Family. My name is Jordy Rosenberg, and I'll be moderating this panel with Bernice McFadden, Emma Straub, and Karolina Wacławiak. I'll be introducing our panelists. They will speed read for 3 minutes each, and then I will mildly shepherd a conversation amongst us. And I think if we have time, I'll be able to take some questions from the audience. Let me do the introductions on the readers first. And they each are very eminent, and I will be reading their introductions for almost as long as they'll be reading their work. So in order, Bernice L. McFadden is the author of Sugar, celebrating its 20th anniversary, The Book of Harlan, Loving Donovan, Gathering of Waters, which was a New York Times editor's choice and one of the 100 notable books of 2012, and Glorious, which was featured in Oprah Magazine, and was a finalist for the NAACP Image Award. She is a 4-time Hurston Wright Legacy Award finalist, as well as the recipient of 3 awards from the BCALA. Praise Song for the Butterflies is her latest novel. Emma Straub is the New York Times bestselling author of 3 previous novels, The Vacationers, Modern Lovers, and Laura Lamont's Life in Pictures, as well as the short story collection, Other People We Married. Her most recent novel is All Adults Here. Her books have been published in 20 countries. She and her husband own the wonderful Books Are Magic, an independent bookstore in Brooklyn, New York. Karolina Wacławiak is the author of the novels How to Get Into the Twin Palms, The Invaders, and most recently, Life Events. Formerly an editor at The Believer, she is the executive editor of culture at BuzzFeed News. So everybody be nice. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Virginia Quarterly Review, Hazlitt, and other publications. And I'm told that there's a link where everyone can buy books from these authors on the festival website. It might even be at the bottom of your screen, but I don't see it. Anyway, buy their books. And we will be having everyone read in order, alphabetical order. So that means Bernice McFadden will begin.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so happy to be here. Today I'm going to be reading from my first novel, Sugar, which was published in 2000. So it's celebrating its 20th anniversary. Jude was dead. On a day when the air held a promise of summer and people laughed aloud, putting aside for a brief moment their condition, color, and where they ranked among humanity, Jude, dangling on the end of childhood and reaching out toward womanhood, should have been giggling with others her age among the sassafras, or dipping her bare feet in Hodges Lake and shivering against the winter chill it still clutched. Instead, she was dead. She'd been taken down by the sharp blade of jealousy, and her womanhood, so soft, pink, and virginal, was sliced from her and laid to rest on the side of the road near her body. Her pigtails, thick, dark ropes of hair, lay splayed out above her head, mixed in with the pine needles and road dust. Her dress, white and yellow, her favorite colors, was pulled up to her neck, revealing the small bosom that had developed over the winter. The murder had white man written all over it. That was only a half-truth. But no one would say it above a whisper. It was 1940. It was Bigelow, Arkansas. It was a Black child. Need any more be said? No one cared except the people who carried the same skin color. No one cared except the parents who had nursed her, stayed up all night soothing and rocking her when she was colicky, applauded her when she took her first steps, and cried when the babbling, gurgling sounds that came from her sweet mouth finally formed the words mama, and then later papa. They cared, the parents of sweet, sweet Jude, who would never hurt a fly, no less a human being. Look at what they did to her. Word first came via the Edelson boy. He'd run all the way and was breathless when he arrived. Black John, the blacksmith, had found her body a mile down the road and covered her body with a crocus sack while he put himself in the right frame of mind to start coming. He had to pop the boy upside the head twice, this just to get him moving instead of gawking. Black John remained behind, gathering the broken child into his arms and placing her gently in his wagon among the bags and crates of filled provisions. He stood looking at the beaten body of this almost woman. In life, she was a tall child, strapping like her father, but in death, she seemed so small. Perhaps it was because of her broken bones and the way her skin sank in the places between the breaks that made her look so tiny and uneven. He shook his head in pity and looked up into the heavens for an answer. An arrow of blackbirds blinded the sun and then moved on. If that was clarification of why and what lay ahead, Black John never said, but he would think back on this day again in 15 years' time. His wife had helped birth this child, as she had most of the Bigelow children. She would take it hard, like she'd lost one of her own. He looked back at the child again, and a heavy sigh escaped him. No rest for the weary, he muttered, and then couldn't think of why that would come to mind at all. He was procrastinating, standing there behind his wagon of potatoes, turnips, cabbage, yam, and Jude. He was stretching the space between his arrival and the scene that would follow, crying eyes and screaming mouths. He had seen plenty of grief in his life, but grief let loose from a woman who lost a child, that was the worst type of grief of all. If you could, you try to avoid that sort, because grief that comes from loss of a child just took a piece of you away each time you met up with it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Emma.
Yep, I'll go. Okay, I'm just going to read the first 2 paragraphs of All Adults Here. The quick death. Astrid Strick had never liked Barbara Baker, not for a single day of their 40-year acquaintance. But when Barbara was hit and killed by the empty speeding school bus at the intersection of Main and Morrison Streets on the eastern side of the town roundabout, Astrid knew that her life had changed, the shock of which was indistinguishable from relief. It was already a busy day. She'd spent the morning in the garden. She had a haircut appointment at 11:30, and then her granddaughter Cecilia was arriving by train with 2 suitcases and 0 parents. No school bus accidents there, just a needed escape hatch. And Astrid was to meet her at the Clapham station to bring her back to the big house. The bus hit Barbara just after 11. Astrid was sitting in her parked car on the inner lane of the roundabout, the verdant circle at the center of town, adjusting her hair in the mirror. It was always that way, wasn't it, that one's hair looked best on the day of a scheduled trim. She didn't wash her hair at home unless they'd gone to the beach or she'd been swimming in chlorinated water or some foreign substance, paint, glue, was accidentally lobbed in her direction. No, Bertie Gonzalez washed Astrid's hair every Monday and had done so for 5 years, before which it had been washed by Nancy at the same salon, Sheer Beauty, which was located on the southeastern side of the roundabout in the quarter circle between the Clapham Credit Union and Susan's Bookshop, kitty corner from Spiro's Pancake House if you peered through the open sides of the white wooden gazebo at the grassy island center. The professional hair washing was a relic from her mother's generation and an affectation that her own mother had not possessed, and yet there it was. It was not a pricey indulgence if weighed against the cost of proper conditioner. On every 8th Monday, Bertie also gave Astrid a trim. Nancy had given slightly better haircuts, but Bertie was better with the shampoo, and Astrid had never been vain, only practical. Anyway, Nancy had retired, and Astrid hadn't missed her. Bertie was from Texas, and her parents were from Mexico, and Astrid thought of her as human sunshine, bright, warm, sometimes harsh, but always good for one's mood. Your turn, Caroline.
Thank you, Emma. I'm going to read sort of early on in the book, and this is a recurring dream, or I guess nightmare, that Evelyn, the protagonist, has, and it's a car ride she has to take to get her parents from her home to their home in the Southwest. We are running against time in this car, but we still need to eat, so we stop at McDonald's to get Egg McMuffins, and we quietly chew while I drive. We hardly speak because what is there to say? Instead, we take turns using my mother's new fingertip oxygen tester on each other to test the amount of oxygen in our blood. I don't know how it works, but it does. My mother tests herself first. Without oxygen pumping into her nose through a clear plastic tube, she only has 78% oxygen in her blood. This is bad. This is why we presume she is dying. The normal amount of oxygen in your blood should not dip below 88%. She asks my father for his fingertip, and he produces it between our seats, and she clicks the tester onto his finger, and we wait. When his reading says 96%, she feels like she's lost something, a competition, but they have different ailments, so it's hard to compare. Let's test the healthy one, my mother says. I'm driving, I say. Just give me your finger. I do what she tells me to do because she is my mother, and when my reading comes back 100%, she says, do you see this? She's perfect. But the problem is I'm not, and I know it. We whiz past exits and rest stops in the open desert where there are whirling dust devils on either side of us. Some are small and some look like massive tornadoes of dirt. One crosses over the road we are driving on, and I wait for something miraculous to happen, but it just disappears around us. We should be taking care of you, not the other way around, my father says from the back seat. I take note, but stay silent. He does this now, make unprompted declarations laced with guilt. Ahead, I see the dark clouds of thunderstorms and watch as soundless lightning shoots down into the nearby hills. I know we are going to drive into the storm, and my mother is scared, but I tell her not to worry. When we reach the rain, it is torrential, and I can't see the yellow lanes anymore, but I can't just announce that, so I keep quiet. My father is frozen in silence in the back seat, still staring out the window. Lightning strikes near his side of the car, but he doesn't jump. He just opens his mouth in childlike awe. As we reach the edge of the clouds, I slow the windshield wipers and open the window to smell the rain on the hot asphalt. From the back seat, my father says, petrichor. What, my mother asks? That's what the smell is called, he says as the sun envelops us. I didn't know, I say, watching him nod in the rearview mirror. I worry I will never know half of what they know, and there isn't enough time to ask. We don't stop driving until we reach Tombstone, Arizona, and by then the sun is setting and the sky is a kind of pink I've never seen before in real life. I've driven through the Southwest dozens of times and have seen the desert skies alight with the sunset before, but in my dream, the sky is the color of sherbet because the sun is setting behind the storm clouds. It feels hopeful, even though things inside the car are dire. The three of us are looking for any kind of hope. So when I stop at the rest stop to go to the bathroom, I roll down the windows and yell, look. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. That was wonderful. I've been living with your novels for the past while, and then very intensively in the past couple of days. I'm trying to think about some kind of framing questions that we can work with in talking about how you all kind of navigate these questions of family and literary form and writing. I wanted to start actually with something that has been obsessing me alongside of all this, which is a book that I read for the first time this summer, which is W.E.B. Du Bois's biography of John Brown, the abolitionist John Brown. And there's this amazing passage in it that was very resonant to me right now. And it's a passage that's talking about almost John Brown as like a revolutionary epidemiologist. And almost that part of his abolitionism was protecting other people from his white family. And so instead of protecting his family, it was seeing his own family as almost pathological and dangerous. And so I think one of his children has maybe scarlet fever or some communicable illness in it. And Du Bois reports, especially were his sympathy and devotion evident in sickness. When his children were ill with scarlet fever, he took care of us himself. And if he saw persons coming to the house, would go to the gate and meet them, not wishing them to come in for fear of spreading the disease. When any of the family were sick, he did not often trust watchers to care for the sick one, but sat up himself and was like a tender mother. So one thing that hasn't been remarked so much in this section on in John Brown is the feminization of labor, of John Brown's labor. He's represented as a nurse and a mother, and that's something we do want to talk about, which is the feminization of homework, right? When we talk about family, we're talking about an idea, an ideology, a feeling that we have, but we're also talking about a certain kind of labor. And we're also talking about a certain kind of racialized labor, because as Angela Davis very famously said in the Black Woman's Role in the Community of Slaves, Black women, enslaved Black women, were traditionally not even permitted to have families, right? So the question is, to whom is family even permitted, right? We're talking about escaping the family, but we need to begin with who's even allowed to have a family in the beginning to begin with that's recognized as family, who's able to be recognized as a mother. This is a racialized question. And so I think I bring up Davis and Du Bois and John Brown as a way to kind of set the scene for what's happening right now. And of course, we have this question of the first family of our nation, which is the kind of white supremacist counterexample to John Brown, where they're just infecting everyone willy-nilly. And also thinking about, I think a lot of people are thinking about this question of what does it mean to be quarantined? And suddenly when people have many people who have been described, a friend, Jasbir Puar, described the theorist, Jasbir Puar describes them as some of us, myself included, as the stay-at-home class, whose labor do we normally rely on in order to make our families work, and what happens when that reproductive labor is taken away or stops at the threshold. So really the issue here is how porous the family actually is in its ability to exploit other people's labor, but also how we are surviving at home. And of course, most of the reproductive labor falls to women again. So the question, all of these questions kind of cohere to me around a couple of things. One is, there's this in Katerina's book, there's this really long section on death dueling, right? And I one of the main character is kind of a really long, beautiful section on sort of seeing an older woman to her death in a kind of humane and loving way. And I think we can think about death dueling as a kind of, if we replace the word family with a kind of reproductive labor, by way of the theorist Tithi Bhattacharya calls reproductive labor life-making work, the work of life-making. And that doesn't just mean us in a family, but that means everything we also rely on to make life work. I think we might also think about death making as a kind of life making or as a kind of reproductive labor. And I was just wondering, Carolina, sorry, I think I just called you Katerina. Carolina, to what extent this question of death and death dueling kind of was a way perhaps to kind of work through or metabolize certain questions around the family. I'm gonna like line up 3 questions, one for each of you, and then let you just go. For Emma, in your book, the inciting event, there's a huge, large extended family, but the inciting event that sets off all of the action, and this had to have been kind of like a structural question that you must have been working with, is the death of this woman who's not in their family, and a woman to whom family on a certain level in terms of reproduction has been disallowed by her husband. And it's also been disallowed for her to escape or leave the family, because spoiler alert, part of it was that she tries to leave him and live like her retirement life as a single woman or without him, and then she's killed. So I mean, I guess I was just curious structurally, how you arranged and how you thought about developing the action of the novel around its central inciting event being someone outside the family. And then Bernice, I don't even know where to start. There's so much here and there's so much with your work. I think something that a lot of critics have commented on about your work is the extent to which the role of haunting is so prominent. And I wondered if it's possible to think about haunting in terms of this question of family and familial reproduction. In Sugar, of course, the daughter is taken away, and then there's kind of a surrogate daughter, I don't want to give away too much, who turns out to be, well, we won't spoil what's an incredible read. But, again, this asks this question of to whose families are robbed, and how do we use haunting and repetition as a form of sort of manifesting familialness when reproduction or traditional forms of reproduction have been stolen. And I'm just curious if any of those things resonate with people, and how you work around them in your own practice and just conceiving the work. And I know these are very large questions, but just seems like it's a pretty large topic. So feel free to answer any of those questions or anything that seems adjacent.
You want me to go first?
And anyone who's ready to respond.
I think for my book, I was really interested in looking at, our culture in America has a really complicated relationship with death. I think there's a lot of fear around death and dying. And so I really wanted to build a character who's plunging headfirst into the world of death and dying and facing it, really because she's afraid of her own parents' death. And I think it's interesting to think about, in terms of family, when you sort of orient yourself around your parents and they are your universe and your world, how do you reorient your life when you're no longer orbiting your parents? And so in terms of her life is falling apart as she decides to be a death doula. But I think, it's really interesting to ask these questions at a time when, all the things that you're supposed to do by her age at 37, build a family, build your own family, have this bigger life. She doesn't have that. And so she really feels like a sense of failure, and she wants to emerge from that and sort of face these larger life questions through facing death, and not her own, but be around people who are choosing to end their own lives, who have terminal illnesses. And I do think, she's sort of building a family with not only the other people that are working with her, who, are facing death in a culture where people are uncomfortable with that, but also building connections with these people who are dying and creating new, different kinds of families with them as she helps shepherd them out of their lives. And I think it's an uncomfortable question, like, what does your life look like when you're no longer orbiting around these people who have made you? And how do you build your life after that? And a lot of the book is her pre-grieving the idea that her parents will one day die, and she's really preoccupied by that. But that grief, I think, is really interesting.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Yeah, I think everything you're saying really points out to this blurriness, the way that service work, because essentially death dueling is straddling this line between service work and becoming part of a family. That service work is asked to take on so many roles at once, like being a surrogate family, doing labor in someone's home, and the feelings that the service worker may have doing that, and also what's projected onto them. I thought it was a really kind of unique exploration of that dynamic.
There's so much intimacy in that shared fear. And essentially, their philosophy is they don't want people to die alone. And so you are building this intimacy, and you're with somebody at their most profound moment and helping them shepherd them out of their own lives. But it is service work, and so much of her push and pull is not absorbing this pain, and she's really trying to thwart it while investigating it. So it's complicated, especially if you look at it as service work.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll go. This idea of haunting speaks directly to, I think, my own personal life. Growing up in my family, we spent a lot of time talking about family members who had already passed on. And so because we continue to keep them alive through the oral tradition, I always felt like, even though I had a large family, that it was even bigger because of all of these family members that had become ancestors. And so whenever I sit down to write, it is virtually impossible for me not to include those ancestors in my
Mhm.
writings. I think that's where the whole theme of haunting comes
Mhm.
about. And then the idea of family, like what makes a
Mhm.
family? We are in 20, I think we've moved so far and away from whatever that traditionally might have been. For me, my family is not only the people that I share kin with, but it's also the people that I have decided to call, uncle or sister
Mhm.
or brother. And it
Mhm.
also always includes those who have already gone over to the other side.
Mhm.
So when I sat down to write Sugar, it was probably, I think it was the first time that I realized exactly how it is I was creating story, that I could not create story without including ancestors,
Mhm.
because it's like I said, it's part and parcel of family. Also, this idea about death being the end, I believe that growing up, but I think that my idea of death took a very serious shift once I became a mother. And when Pearl loses Jude in such a horrific way, obviously she is devastated. But she is looking at this passing of her daughter as the end of her life. When Sugar
Right.
steps into her life, a whole other door is open for her. So death is not really the end. It's the
Mhm.
end of one thing and the end of something else.
Mhm. Yeah, that's. Did you ever, were there major plot points with that novel that you ever considered doing differently, like the Joe connection or anything? I'm just wondering how you ended up, or if you knew the whole arc before you started.
I never know.
Hmm.
I never know. Like I said, I mean, I'm very grateful for the ones that with me that I cannot see, but I can feel and experience through them. So really my process is I may have an idea in my head, but I don't know the beginning, middle, and end. And I just allow the story to unfurl. I wrote Sugar probably 30 years ago, but
Hmm.
enjoying so much the intricacy of the connections.
Hmm.
It's like a puzzle, and it reflected me exactly, who we are in this world. We are all, what do they say, 6 degrees, probably less now, the social media,
Hmm.
separated from other people. So that
Hmm.
fascinated me then, and it continues to fascinate me.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, there's so much um, more I want to ask about this novel. I'll let us move on to Emma, and hopefully we'll get to come back.
Sure. Something that Bernice just said sort of, you know, uh, resonated with my little notes that I wrote down to answer your question, Jordy, which is that, when I started writing the book, I had such a clear idea of what it was. I thought that it was really about, the people, the generation of this one family that is my generation, is to say caring in both directions, like caring for parents who are getting older and also caring for small children.
Mhm.
Because it's the zone that I am in personally, and so it's all I think about all day long. And so I thought that is, that was really what the book was going to be about. And in some ways, of course, it is. But I think that I think that something that you sort of pointed out, Jordy, about, the way that the novel ended up being structured was that it actually has a lot more to do with feelings of judgment and shame than I anticipated. And I think that, sneaking, it's not sneaking, it's in the first sentence, but like, having this other character who's not inside the family sort of set off the story and get things rolling, let me look at the whole family and each of the generations and each of the family members in the book with a more, with more of an outsider's eye. And it sort of helped me, it helped me understand each of them better and how they related to each other. And it became a really important, really the sort of crux of the story for Astrid, who's sort of the heroine. But when I started writing, I didn't know that she was the heroine. I sort of thought that I was writing this like rom-com, like I don't know what I thought. I mean, Bernie says she doesn't know where she's going. I always think I know where I'm going. I'm always very confident that I know exactly where I'm going. It just so happens that I'm always wrong.
I'm trying to think of how to bring you into this next question, but I know how it relates to Carolina and Bernice. So give me a second to find a third part of the question. But the question really just had to do with kind of writing about sexuality, sex and sexuality. I mean, there's a lot of sex and sexuality in your book, Emma. But in relation to a particular question about it, because something Carolina said in your answer made me think about, the work death dueling is like we said, like straddling this line, and it's hard for her, even though she wants to do it, and it's bringing up a lot of feelings. And then, I think about those scenes, the scene in particular where she's like seeing, I can't remember the character's name, the 92-year-old woman, she's seeing her off to her death during the sunset. And at the same time, kind of in the back of her mind thinking like, I really need to make out with this other like guy that's helping me with this. And I was thinking about, sexuality as a, in its relationship to service work, sexuality in relation to the family. And of course this, and how and when you kind of brought that in, or how you thought about that outlet, or if it just kind of cropped up, or, were you like mapping out like she's going to do this and then fall in love with the guy, or did it kind of just happen? And then, it relates to very much so, I think, to Bernice's, to Sugar, in the sense that, the titular character is a sex worker, right? And so she's constantly negotiating her position as a sex worker, which is one sort of service work, and her desires to kind of integrate in the family with Pearl and Joe, right? And then, I mean, there's the brutal, tragic, terrible scene where she loses, her love interest because of her kind of need to continue or like one last job, and there's this distinction set up between sexuality as like an expression of love, and sexuality as service work, and how that intersects with her desires to be part of a family is all really, it's all really in there together. And I know this relates to your book too, but I want to see if these.
I'll chime in. Let them talk. I'll chime in when I can.
Like how you think about writing sexuality in relation to the family, I guess.
I mean, it's interesting. I was thinking a lot about, again, Evelyn is in these really intimate moments, and she does have someone who's working with her. His name is Nathan, for one of the deaths. And you're having such a profound experience with, two other people. And at the end of their client's life, it's dying, I think, is such a primal act. And you can't help but feel like, what have I not done in my life? And there are these moments you know, from my experience, where you're seeing that the end is near and you're wanting to like act out almost. And so for me, it felt natural in the face of death for Evelyn to want to be comforted, but also react in a primal way. And for her, that was in a sexual way. And I think it, you know, for her, it comes, she's wrestling through the whole book with power dynamics and relationships, especially like her relationships with men. And later in the book, she fails to detach with another male client. And I think, you know, she's attempting to regain a sense of control and power through these sexual encounters. And yeah, it's really interesting to me, you know, in the book, she's talking to someone who's like, you sort of either look at sex through the lens of power or the lens of love. And she's so squarely in power mode as she's looking at sexual encounters. And I think, you know, she's trying to find her place. And as someone who feels like there's such a lack of power in her life, exerting some through sexuality, I thought was like a really interesting choice, especially as she's working with clients and male and female clients that are all sort of wrestling with this loss of control at the end of their lives.
Yeah, thank you. Emma, is this bringing anything up for you?
Well, I mean, you know, there's certainly a lot about sex and sexuality in my book, and I think that hi Bernice, are you
Hi,
frozen?
Brittany.
Oh, she's unfrozen. Here,
Okay.
Great.
why don't you answer and then I'll go.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, just like blacked out. Was going. Sex and sexuality and sugar. I think that sex was demystified for me very young age. So I was quite familiar with, you know, the act of lovemaking. So it's something that was not, it's not uncomfortable for me to write about because it was something that was spoken about quite often in my family. And so when it got down to me crafting the story about Sugar as a sex worker and Pearl as the demure Bible-carrying Baptist, has only been with one man her entire life, which is a husband. I think what the two did for the story was here you had Sugar, who was well versed in what goes on in the bedroom, but almost vacant of the emotionality that comes along with being in love and loving someone. And that versus Pearl, or in contrast to Pearl, who was all about the emotional love, but was vacant as to what it was she needed to do in the bedroom to please herself and please her husband. And when they came together, each gave the other what the other one was missing. And I think that, you know, that happens more often than not just, you know, not just with sex, but I have a lot of older women friends in my life. And so we have these sort of exchanges. There are things that I'm not privy to yet at this age, and they're already there, and they could, you know, educate me. And here I am at this age, educating them about things that that I experience in my life in this moment that they think is just out of this world, actually. So I feel like I'm babbling. I hope I answered the question.
No, I mean, it's such a hard question. I never know how to talk about that kind of thing in literary writing. It just really struck me, you know, what a huge role it plays in both of in both of your books, especially in relation to the question of labor and family, and is it going to, especially for Sugar, like, is it going to be the thing that disallows her from being part of this family? She's so concerned about it. And also, just as an aside, that scene with, now I'm forgetting, is his name Seth, Pearl's son? Why am I? That scene in the movie theater was like one of the most just heart-wrenching and beautiful scenes when she puts her head on his shoulder, and it's like a revelation to her. It's very beautiful. Anyway, all right, Emma.
I guess, you know, what I was, the sort of way that I think I can connect my book here is that, you know, it's sort of the opposite of what Bernice just described, where, like, you know, what happens in a family where nothing is open, right? Where nothing is talked about, and how does that change generationally? You know, and if you have a matriarch who is pushing 70, who, you know, would rather die than talk to her children about sex, about their sex lives, about her sex life, about, you know, sex period existing. You know, what does that do to their relationships, with their mother, but also their sexual relationships? And then what does that do, you know, sort of as it goes down the line? And what I thought about a lot writing this book was just how much, you know, how much that really does affect people, you know, how open you are, what exposure you have to things, just drastically changes how you feel about something. Like, I mean, I have had more conversations with my 7-year-old about gender than I ever had with my parents, and I'm 40, you know. I mean, now I have a lot of conversations with my parents about gender because of my 7-year-old, but I never did growing up. That just wasn't on the menu of things that we talked about. And so you know, and I think it also is, you know, partially because of my life at the bookstore. I'm also surrounded by really smart 20-somethings all the time. And it's really like encouraging, thinking about the direction that the world can and hopefully will go, just to understand that, you know, people who are, you know, in their 20s and younger, are more able to talk about things than my generation, you know, was, at least in my you know, in my part of the world. But yeah, so that sort of thing, I definitely thought about a lot writing this book.
Yeah, no, it shows. I mean, there's an incredible tension that builds throughout when you realize that you've built a whole world and none of the parts of the world know about the other parts of the world. It's almost like you've constructed a number of intense parallaxes in total proximity. And that's one of the outstanding things a novel can do. So I'm getting alerted that we are almost done. We have one more minute. So I think I want to use that minute to thank all of our panelists. That went by way too fast. And now we're done. Everybody buy their books. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for talking, everybody.
Thank you, Jordy. Everyone read Jordy's book too. It's amazing.
It's what it is. All right. Bye.
All right.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.